order. Welcome to meeting 114 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. We're all very happy to be back. See the group at the table. Everybody's ready to do the work we're here to do and here on international trade. Before we begin, I need to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards that are on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. I'd like to remind all members of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair, and raise your hands if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. Thank you all for your cooperation. All right, I see I have Mr. Savard-Tremblay and then Mr. Cannings before I start. OK.
Oui, Madame la Présidente, deux questions. Tout d'abord, bonjour, j'espère que tout le monde a eu un bel été. Deux petites questions bien brèves. Tout d'abord, nous avons reçu une lettre concernant une demande.
I hope everyone had a great summer. We received a letter for a meeting with the Equatorian women. Can we discuss this later? And
we're not getting any translation.
And I'd like to say from my end that I could hear the English interpretation when I was speaking, whereas I'm on the French channel. I'll try that again. I think it's okay now.
Yeah, so is mine. I'm not getting any. So is mine. Nothing either. So Mr. Canning's not. So maybe it's this. Okay, let's try that.
Mine's working.
Testing. This is the English channel. Can the speakers? This is the interpreter on the English channel. Can you all hear me? This is the interpreter on the English channel. Madam Chair, on my end, I was set on the French channel, so I could hear the French.
Bonjour, ça va bien?
Hello.
Vous m'entendez bien?
Is it okay now? Can you hear me?
Parfait.
Perfect, thank you.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, would you speak about something, anything that they can translate to make sure that we got it all?
Oui, je peux bien vous parler de certainement.
Well, no problem. I can speak to you. I'm not going to raise my question immediately so that I don't have to repeat myself, but so far, can you hear me in the language of your choice? Are you able to hear me? All right, then.
Is everybody good? Mr. Cannings? Okay. Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
So I have two questions. I'm going to ask them at the same time. We all received a letter for a meeting with an Equatorian delegation to talk to us about human rights, bearing in mind that we're envisaging a discussion on a free trade agreement with that country. Can we discuss this later in the meeting? Question number two, I realize that this is the former equipment, the old equipment that is here. Can someone provide an explanation for why the previously new equipment that was installed is not there today?
Thank you very much. I have to also acknowledge Sophie has had her baby, and we have a new clerk, as you can see. Grant, would you introduce yourself?
Sure.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Grant McLaughlin. I will be taking on the Committee for International Trade. Happy to meet you all and look forward to working together. Of course, if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, as that's what I'm here for.
So I think you can answer the first question.
On the request from the delegation, my understanding is that the intention is to discuss that in the second half of the meeting.
It's October the 2nd that we're having the Ecuador. There was a request from the Ecuadorian group that wanted to come, but we can discuss it further when we go into committee business. If you'd rather. Okay. Yeah. And the issue with the mics?
C'est une bonne question sur laquelle, pourquoi on
Really
a
great question regarding why we have the old equipment and new earpieces. I will have to reach out with management to confirm the details as to why and make sure that I'm able to provide the proper response. Well, no problem. You'll get back to us as soon as you have an answer. Thank you.
Mr. Cannings? Did you have some?
My question was regarding the fact I was getting no feed,
Okay.
and now it was the earpiece that was the problem.
Okay, seems to be working. All right, okay. So pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, August the 21st, 2024, the committee is commencing its study on protecting certain Canadian manufacturing sectors, including electric vehicles, aluminum, and steel, against related Chinese imports and measures. With us in person today, we have from the Canadian Labour Congress, someone who's here frequently, Elizabeth Kahn, a senior researcher. From Electric Mobility Canada, Daniel Breton, President and Chief Executive Officer by video conference. And from the United Steelworkers Union, Marty Warren, National Director, and Maid Grinjich, Assistants to the National Director by video conference. And as an individual, we have Lawrence Herman, Counsel. Welcome to you all. We will start with opening remarks. And Ms. Kahn, I turn the floor over to you for 5 minutes, please. Where's the timer?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee members. It's my honor to be here with you today on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Canadian Labour Congress advocates on behalf of all workers in Canada. The 55 national and international unions affiliated with the CLC bring together over 3 million workers in virtually all sectors, industries, occupations, and regions of this country. Chair, the goal of trade and industrial policy towards a net zero economy is to ensure the future of an innovative, high productivity, and competitive manufacturing industry in Canada, providing good paying union jobs and helping to meet Canada's Paris objective. Urgent protective measures are required to prevent lasting damage to the nascent ZEV industry from Chinese dumping, which poses risk to over 600,000 Canadian jobs, many of them unionized jobs, and jeopardizes the almost $53 billion announced by the federal government for the Canadian EV industry. This threatens Canada's trajectory to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. Chair, I'd like to highlight a few recommendations from our submission to the government's consultation on potential policy responses to unfair Chinese trade practices in EVs. First, the CLC supports the government's surtax on EVs made in and imported from China. Second, the CLC recommends that the government work with unions and establish a plan to support workers in all sectors that may be affected by China's retaliatory measures following Canada's policy responses to their unfair EV supply chain trade practices. Third, the CLC supports the government excluding ZEV point-of-sale incentives for EVs made in and exported from China, regardless of whether they bear Chinese or non-Chinese brand marks, and based on thresholds of certain Chinese critical minerals and battery components. Fourth, any federal government investment tax credits, production subsidies, or construction and other supports must be directed towards the nascent supply chain and exclude EV companies from other countries that lack high labor and environmental standards and use unfair trade policies and practices, like China. Fifth, The government needs to vigorously implement the ban of forced labor in the supply chain as per Article 23.6 of CUSMA. 6, the CLC echoes the United Steelworkers of Canada's call to Canada to have a strategy on the materials used to build a clean, low-carbon economy. And 7, CLC supports the government imposing surtaxes on Chinese steel and aluminum products. Chair, cheap Chinese EVs, EV batteries and parts, steel and aluminum impact Canadians in the slow creation of net zero jobs, possible job losses, and fallout from circumvention of CUSMA. The CLC supports the government's recent announcement to impose surtaxes to provide a short-term temporary protection to allow the developing Canadian EV investments to establish and ensure the transition of workers to good, well-paying green jobs. Canadians and unions expect domestic manufacturers in the EV supply chain to use this temporary reprieve to ensure high-quality Canadian-built ZEVs come on the market in growing numbers in the near term. However, there are many serious considerations to weigh in arriving at longer-term policy responses, including the faltering trajectory of domestic EV supply chain development and decarbonization efforts, and the state of geopolitics, in particular the China and U.S. rivalry. In developing longer-term policy responses, Canada is strongly positioned. In 2024, Canada ranked first in EV supply chain potential in the world. The government must use every tool in its arsenal and work with unions to realize the full potential of growth opportunities to become a global leader in this space. But the road of transition will be bumpy, and that is why the CLC supports the Sustainable Jobs Act. We want greater continued investments in social protections and supports for workers in sectors at risk in the transition to a low-carbon economy. Lastly, the CLC urges the government to include labor conditions of prevailing union wages and apprenticeship requirements in the new electric vehicle supply chain investment tax credit that will be detailed in the upcoming fall economic statement. The government must build on its commitment and obligations to foster an inclusive, worker-centered approach to trade in its climate-focused policies, investment tax credits, and other supports towards a net zero future. Thank you. Look forward to your questions.
Very much. Mr. Breton, for up to 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, Madame la Présidente. Mon nom est Daniel Breton.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Daniel Breton, CEO and Chair of Electric Mobility. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee to discuss tariffs on EVs produced in China. Before I begin, I'd like to mention that we are in support of tariffs on EVs produced in China. Mobility Electric Canada, the Canadian Association for Transportation, involves car manufacturers as well as all-wheel drive vehicles, and we are conscious of the sensitive nature of this file.
Workers and our local EV supply chain investments are protected from unfair labor practices from China. On the other, we want to ensure that Canadian consumers and end users have access to more affordable, light, medium, and heavy-duty EVs, and as much as possible, made here. EMC and its members suggested a targeted approach that supports Canadian workers, innovation, and our growing EV supply chain, while addressing Chinese labor and environmental practices that have an impact on the Canadian auto industry. China holds a dominant role in global smelting and refining of critical minerals, including most of the lithium and copper sourced from Chile and Australia. China also has a dominant position in battery technology and manufacturing. The global EV supply chain presently relies on this battery technology and certain components from China to function. China could take significant retaliatory action in response to an across-the-board surtax. Canadian tariff actions in this regard should not be taken arbitrarily. AMC recommended that any surtax be phased in and time-limited to allow affected EV manufacturers sufficient time to adjust their production plans. This will also have provided OEMs fair warning that they need to address issues of affordability and be prepared for competition. This is why we recommended the following targeted action: impose an import surtax on EVs as well as gas and diesel vehicles assembled in China after having reviewed how China's practices have an impact on the Canadian auto industry. There is no environmental value to keeping out Chinese EVs, but allowing Chinese assembled cars, gas cars, and diesel trucks to replace the EV stock. In exchange for this program, the Ontario government should have been required to supply EV incentives and deploy EV infrastructure for light-duty vehicles to make sure that EVs are affordable in that province. With $40 billion in total government support for Honda, VW, and Stellantis alone in Ontario, we feel that the Ontario government must do a lot more to support EV adoption in their province, which is lagging behind, believe it or not, Quebec, BC, but even PI and Yukon. As a growing number of car makers are starting to offer more affordable versions of EVs in other countries, and in order to encourage affordable EV availability in Canada for Canadian consumers, we recommend that the federal government provide a 3-year relief period for automakers to offer more affordable EV alternatives. After that period, if an automaker does not offer any EV or PHEV at a 20% lower purchase price than it's offering right now for its electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles, it couldn't be eligible to any EV or PHEV rebates for any of its vehicles. For medium and duty vehicles, we also recommend tariffs, but I'm running out of time. I will explain during the question period. Présentement, certains constructeurs automobiles.
Right now, some automobile manufacturers are providing cheaper options, but not in Canada, but they don't have to do so. As a matter of fact, most automobile manufacturers are no longer offering fuel-run cars coming to Canada, and the zero-emission standard, I can tell you we will never meet this standard. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Breton. On to Mr. Warren, please, for up to 5 minutes. Mr. Warren?
There you go. Thank you, Chair, and the members of the committee. My name is Marty Warren, and I'm the Canadian National Director of the United Steelworkers Union. I'm here with Meg Gingrich, the Assistant to the National Director. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today as part of this study. The United Steelworkers represents over 225,000 members across Canada, many of whom work in industries such as steel, aluminum, and mining. These industries that are vital to our economy, and the workers in these sectors are the backbone to Canada's EV supply chain. They face massive risks due to China's trade practices. The motion for this committee study rightfully emphasizes the serious threat that electric vehicles from China pose to the Canadian industries and workers. Chinese EV manufacturers are heavily subsidized and benefit from unfair competitive advantages, including poor environmental, labor, and human rights standards. These practices pose a direct threat to over 600,000 Canadian workers in the steel, aluminum, mining, and auto parts and auto manufacturing industries. Our members who take pride in producing high-quality materials are being unfairly undermined by cheap substandard imports. That's why we need to protect the entire EV supply chain from predatory Chinese competition. The USW strongly supports the use of Section 53 of the customs tariffs on Chinese EVs. Our largest trading partner, the United States, has already announced an increase on tariffs on Chinese EVs at 100%, while increasing tariffs on steel and aluminum to 25%. These remedies are scheduled to kick in September 27th. We believe Canada should follow suit to ensure that our domestic industries are not left vulnerable and impose the same border tariffs, and expand remedies to other parts of the EV supply chain, including steel, aluminum, and critical minerals. The issue before us today goes beyond just EVs. Chinese excess industry capacity and unfair trade practices have long plagued the steel and aluminum sector. For years, we've been warning of the devastating effects of Chinese steel dumping, which has led to falling prices, job losses, and the decline of our domestic industry. Just last year, offshore steel just last year, increased its share of the Canadian market from 19% to 38%. Steel and aluminum are the center of the EV supply chain, and this market cannot grow without a stable and competitive industry. As China continues to flood global markets with cheap steel and aluminum, Canadian producers, who are hereby some of the highest environmental and labor standards in the world, are being undercut, and workers suffer the tragic consequences. So we urge the government to expand the scope of Section 53's authority to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum products originating from China, where we are pleased that the government has acted in this direction. If Canada does not follow through with this, the Canadian steel producers estimate that over 760 tons of Chinese steel could be diverted into Canada due to the U.S. tariffs. Status quo would be devastating for Canadian workers and businesses. Even with Section 53, Canada remains at a risk as a result of lower non-tariff barriers on China that are imposed in the U.S. So, while these tariffs are necessary, they are only part of the solution. We need a comprehensive and coordinated industrial strategy that includes steel, aluminum, critical minerals as pillars of our EV supply chain. From mining to refining critical minerals to producing the steel and aluminum that will go into EVs and batteries. We also call on the government to increase the use of Canadian-made steel and aluminum in publicly funded infrastructure projects. Public procurement policies should be a priority for these domestic products. Additionally, Canada must implement a carbon adjustment to level the playing field. Canadian producers are world leaders in producing low-emission steel and aluminum, and yet they are being penalized by foreign competitors with much higher carbon footprints.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I have to cut you off, Mr. Warren. Maybe your last comments you can get in response to our question. Mr. Herman, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm very pleased to be here. I hope I'm not a little bit out of context, because I was asked to come and give some views on the legal aspects. I'm a lawyer. I'm not a policy person. I'm pleased to answer questions, and I hope I can provide some clarification. Je vais témoigner en anglais parce que je manque un peu les mots techniques, mais je vais faire mon possible de répondre en français si nécessaire. Look, Mr. Warren made a very good point, and I think the committee has to be conscious of this. Our most important trading partner has taken action against Chinese EVs, steel and aluminum, and Canada, as part of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, has to follow suit. We don't necessarily have to do everything the Americans do, but we're part of an international agreement, a North American trade agreement, and it is incumbent upon Canada to take action accordingly, and that's what the government has done under Section 53 of the Customs Tariff. I can talk a little bit about the Customs Tariff Act and Section 53 during question period. There's no doubt that China has breached its WTO obligations. They engage in strategic targeting of foreign industries through massive subsidies and exports that are developed and implemented basically to inundate and take over foreign markets in strategic areas. And we have to be conscious of that. We have to respond to China's aggressive use of subsidies in breach of basic WTO GATT obligations. I should mention that we're talking about subsidies and not dumping, but dumping of goods can't be completely ignored. The traditional trade remedy approach doesn't work in this case. Trade remedies are dealing with individual companies that are experiencing injury. There is no way in which the traditional trade remedies, anti-dumping, countervailing duties, can deal with China's aggressive strategic actions. I want to talk a little bit about national security, and I'm going to make some suggestions, I think, in the answers to questions. We have rights under WTO GATT provisions to take action when Canada's national security interests are affected. And in my view, in this case, China's actions are a threat to our national security interests. And I think Section 53 of the Customs Tariff Act should be amended to include reference to national security. And there are other aspects of our trade laws that could also be changed to include references to national security. So those are my comments. I'd be happy to deal with any of these points in the question period.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. We will now move on to the members and their question. Mr. Williams, for up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for attending this very important meeting today. And, you know, we really talk about the need for balanced trade, and looking at this relationship with China, but also with the Americans. And Mr. Herman, I'll start with you. You finished it. Can you just let the committee know just a little bit about the current relationship with the U.S. and the Canadians when it comes to trade, and specifically if you can speak about the recent almost doubling of softwood lumber tariffs and the digital sales tax and what they're bringing up as concerns on that?
Oh, those are good questions. Look, in a major trading relationship like the one we have with the Americans, there will always be disputes and disagreements, and softwood lumber is one of those. It's just a fact of life that the U.S. industry is well organized, deep pocketed, and they can keep this dispute going as long as they want. The only way to deal with softwood lumber is to have a separate agreement with the Americans settling this matter. There will always be these kinds of differences. The point I make is that in the large scheme of things, it is important for Canada, Mexico, and the United States to work together to deal with major international concerns such as the Chinese aggressive trade actions. So as part of a trilateral trade agreement, one of the largest, if not the largest trade relationship in the world, we should work together with our trading partners. And look, to be frank, I don't think it's a secret. Everybody on the committee will know this. Our trade with the United States is our dominant interest when it comes to international trade. And so we have to work closely with them, notwithstanding, Mr. Williams, notwithstanding the differences we might have in discrete, separate subject areas.
And just from your expertise right now, is that relationship better or worse, given the fact that, yes, softwood lumber is going for a while, but we just doubled the tariffs, and they're bringing up issues that are affecting trade, and they're talking about the digital sales tax is affecting a trading relationship. Is that making that relationship worse?
Is it making it worse? Look, there'll always be tensions in certain areas. We have an agreement, and the agreement provides for the resolution of those disputes through a third-party settlement process. We'll have to work that out. The Americans will.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. I only have so much time. Mr. Warren, we talked about the steel industry and aluminum. You talked about a broader sense of 600,000 workers. How many workers are just in the steel industry, directly or indirectly?
Meg might help me with that answer, but directly in the steel industry for our union alone, probably close to 20,000. And that's talking our members, our locations. And then obviously the downstream, all the shops around it that support it, the maintenance work. So you're talking 100,000 jobs or more.
So 100,000 jobs, good paychecks in Canada in these industries. We talk about obviously the EV and the steel and aluminum industries from China, and you did talk about dumping of those industries and how that was going to affect it. You had a large number. Maybe you talked about 19 to 38%. How many jobs would be threatened if steel is continually dumped? If we don't have these EV the tariffs in place on aluminum, steel, and EVs, how many of those jobs would be threatened of those
Well,
20?
I would suggest to you, if we don't figure it out, every job will be under threat. Because it comes down to investment, and if again you can't sell your steel, there's no premium on green steel right now. Even though we produce some of the greenest steel in the world, there's no premium in the marketplace for green steel. So if we don't um, put in tariffs to help these manufacturers so they invest, what's a nation without a steel industry? What about all the good jobs, the communities they create? And I will tell you, the last point I'll make is if we're not able to stop our porous borders with foreign steel being dumped in, because at the end of the day, it leaks into the U.S. And our greatest trade partner, especially with steel, is the U.S. And I assume their patience are running thin if we cannot kind of look after our borders and foreign steel continues to leak into their country. Very concerned about that.
Thank you, sir. And something else that we've been hearing from some of the producers as well is which is affecting this is also the carbon tax. Is the carbon tax going to increase the cost for the steel industry? And if so, how many jobs are being thrown out of that?
Well, right now, I think it's too early to say how many jobs. I think, from my perspective, there is no doubt about it that steel producers should not be let scot-free around creating the green economy or continuing to grow within the green economy. I am somewhat concerned how it ramps up with the steel industry. So we're having a harder look at that right now. And we're trying to see if they need a bit of a carve out, a bit of a runway so the technology can catch up with them. The investments can catch up with our steel industry. But it's clear to say they shouldn't be let off the hook. But I am concerned right now the way it ramps up, if it is that we need a closer look at it to see how it impacts investment.
And are you asking then for a pause? Is that something you're asking for?
No, not directly. We were reaching out to some of the parties to have the discussion. I was with the steel producers a couple months ago. We talked to all three parties about it, made them aware of it, and again, we're hopeful that as we continue down this path to figure out a solution that works for our environment, our children, our
Thank you
grandchildren.
very much, sir. I'm sorry I have to interrupt. We're 20 seconds over. The next person, Mr. Sheehan, please.
Well, thank you very much to everyone on this presentation, and it would seem that everyone is in agreement that these tariffs are a good idea. And thank you very much for presenting your, various points and opinions and data on this. Marty, when you talked about this dumping that's been going on for a very, very long time, I'm the member of Parliament for Sault Ste. Marie, and I've been there for quite a while, and I've seen how important the steel industry is directly for the steel workers, but also just for the economy in the Sioux and Northern Ontario. And when I was first elected, Algoma Steel was in bankruptcy protection. Tenaris Tubes had a handful of people working there, basically just maintenance, keeping the lights on. And they had squarely blamed dumped steel, and that was why they were in such a terrible situation. So fast forward, in our first budget, we implemented a plan to strengthen Canada's response to unfair trade, and we implemented measures that created a longer length of time in which a penalty, a lunch level, would be in place. And then we launched a consultation, and after that consultation in 2017, we introduced some really important facts. A particular market situation was one piece of anti-dumping legislation. And the anti-circumvention, scope ruling, and union participation. And I just wanted to highlight and underline the union participation and how important it has been, I believe, for us as we continue our journey together to strengthen the steel industry. I think of Cody Alexander from District 6 and how he had said he went and participated at one of these committee meetings, and they had a favorable ruling after the steelworkers presented how it would affect their jobs and how unfair it was. Could you explain as well to the committee, and I really appreciated the steelworkers' help when the 232 tariffs were put in place on 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum, and how the United Steelworkers on both sides of the border were able to work with us, including Leo Gerard from Northern Ontario, Sudbury, Companion of Canada, and the importance of that voice. And maybe you could explain to this committee the ongoing efforts of United Steelworkers working together on both sides of the border to strengthen the steel industry. So I'd let you provide some comments on that.
Yes, we are. I would say we're very fortunate. We're an international union on both sides of the border, which not only gives us a voice in Ottawa, it gives us a voice in Washington, and we do a lot of work together to protect our countries, our economies. As we all know, our economies are so dovetailed together on almost everything. And just to back up to your point around some of the tariff cases and us having the ability to testify at tariff cases, huge step forward. You hear a lot of the committee people that would normally just get facts and a whole bunch of stuff when they're able to hear a worker, how it affected their community, the layoffs, the lack of overtime, it was, you hear a lot of committee members saying that matters, how it affected their bargaining. They were in a weaker position to bargain pension plans and wages. And so that's been a huge step forward. And I can't thank enough for the committees and that for allowing us to be part of that. And I just want to say with melt and pour coming up, that's a huge step forward too, because these countries circumvent it, or some of these call it China and some other countries like to go to 3 different countries, change the stamp and dump it in. It still dumps steel. So with the implementation of melt and pour, we really need to resource that. We also need to resource the CBSA in terms of affecting or enforcing the trade remedies that we're getting at the Trade Council. So thank you for the work you've done and the importance you see in the steel industry. But I can tell you, us and our U.S. counterpart work strongly together to protect our 2 economies and make sure both of our economies have a thriving steel industry and many other industries.
And you had begun to speak about exploring carbon adjustment. Could you please delve into that a little further, what a carbon adjustment would do in potentially protecting steelworker, aluminum jobs, EV jobs, et cetera?
Yeah, so the theory behind a carbon border adjustment is when steel does come to our shores and it's made in a way that isn't meet our standards or creates environmental impact, creates a problem with carbon emissions, that for them to enter our border to be purchased, there's a carbon border adjustment. You're not doing what it takes to change the world for our kids and grandkids, and we can no longer just let your steel into our country, your product into our country if it's not made up to our standards, because all as you do at that point is undercut all the good work the steel manufacturers are doing in Canada and the US, and you make them not want to invest. And the minute you don't get investment in these huge operations, you're like a grape dying on the vine. So yeah, it is a next step, an important step.
I was going to ask the CLC about how important the prevailing wages and union wages are for the tax credits, if you could answer that in a very short time.
It's extremely important to create good jobs in the transition to a green economy, without a doubt.
Sir Sabar-Tremblay, 6 minutes, please.
Oui, merci. Salutations à l'ensemble.
Thank you, and I want to bring greetings. 1 second. So I want to greet here all the witnesses and thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimonies. Mr. Breton, hello. We saw each other a few days ago at Halifax. We even had some seafood together. So I'm glad to see that the weather was really nice when you did your sound test. Can you come back on your proposal? You are saying that you support the tariffs that will be put in place. You say that this should be extended to cars, gas cars coming from China. Seems to me that there isn't the same geopolitical importance, and China isn't really seen as a power in this regard. It is more in the EV that we need to contain it. Yes, in fact, geopolitically speaking, this is not an issue that is as important. But if we want to be standardized, if we want consequences to be important, Well, there are many gas vehicles that are built in China. They are imported by American automakers, and they found themselves in the dealerships. So, as we say in Quebec, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, so it should be good for everybody. And so this is why that it really isn't logical that this is not the case. Another thing that hasn't been brought up in the conversation since the beginning, and it is important to talk about it, it is also the aspect of industrial spying that we have seen from China in Canadian Research Center. I know from very certain sources that there is a spying that was done by Chinese people in a research center on the electrification of transport in Canada. And this is a very important aspect that just adds to the manners of doing that are not fair, that are not equitable in international commerce if we want to protect not only jobs in assembly and manufacturing with steel. I agree with Mr. Warren was saying. We want to protect our industries. My father used to work in a plant that was removed because it was in a country where the working conditions were not quite as strict and the environmental conditions were not as strict. So we want to protect the jobs here. When it comes to industrial spying, I think that should not be neglected because there are research centers that are world-class center in Quebec, in Nova Scotia, in Dalhousie University. Jeff Dan was at our conference to talk about all the high-level research that was done, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be protecting not only the job, but also our research. This is interesting what you're saying, because right away, as soon as we talk about tariff, it says, oh, okay, well, it's going to limit the competition, which is necessary when you have a market economy. But if we're talking about industrial spying, I think we already know very clearly that there is no competition that will be pure and perfect. So just if you want to add something about this, I'm going to ask you to play, historian. In the 1980s, the administration, which was the origin of the NAFTA, they put in place tariffs against Japanese gas cars. And at the time, it was said, oh, this is going to limit competition. But it is also clear that at the time, Japan was engaging in measures that were not in line. So what was the results now that we have 40 years to look at it? That is a very interesting question. I am old enough to remember of the articles in Times and Newsweek about the Japanese invasion with Nissan, Toyota, and so on. And there was a practice that said that we were imposing tariff about 60% on the imports. And what it did is that in the end, Japanese builders came to install themselves in North America. So I can tell you that there are some Chinese automakers and truck makers and bus makers that are coming to North America. So this is part of the equation in all the discussions that are being held. It is something else that people must, examine. One of our important members is Unifor. Unifor has members who work in assembly, in unionized assembly centers. And what we see is that several builders, they are offering non-union jobs now. And this is also part of the good conditions. We have to take this into account in the equation. I want to come back here on the topic of the fact that when we are talking about protecting our jobs, we must also talk about protecting Canadian consumers. And what we're sorry about is that some automakers who are making EV vehicles in Canada, they're also selling EVs in Europe, Asia, and so on. But the vehicles that they're offering, we don't have the same choice here that we have in Europe, for example. We have baseline vehicles that are not offered in Canada. So, for example, we must have, base vehicles so that they would be less expensive, and that would increase the volume of EVs that are being sold, and it would allow us to, create more jobs. So there will be a consultation starting very soon, not only on the vehicles, but also on battery and critical minerals, as well as chips. and that consultation will be extremely important. We will also want to intervene on that. Sorry.
Well, thank you, and thank you to all the witnesses that are here today. It's clear, I think, that we all agree that this action is needed, that we need to impose these tariffs because of our relationship with the United States, because of what China's doing. But I guess what a lot of Canadians, and certainly myself, are concerned about is how this will affect the necessary fight to reduce our emissions overall and promote the uptake of electric vehicles in Canada and promote, the electric vehicle industry, I think. And I'm going to turn to Ms. Kwan, the CLC, and talk about, I think you, if I'm not mistaken, made the point that these should be short-term temporary measures to make sure that Canadian manufacturers step up to the plate and start producing low-cost vehicles that Canadians can afford. And if they're so afraid of Chinese vehicles coming in that are cheaper than ours, this is what we should be striving for, and this is what we should be using these tariffs to drive. Is that the point you were trying to make?
Yes, that is exactly the point. This is basically a short reprieve, a temporary reprieve for Canadian manufacturers in the EV supply chain to basically step up to the plate and, build the things that they have promised to build with investments from a lot of public dollars, right? And to actually get it started. The issue is that we haven't really established or used the amount of investments to actually establish a solid foundation yet. And so the introduction of cheap EVs at this point will be very, very damaging. What we're saying is that Canadians are competitive, and therefore we need to give ourselves a chance to actually build on the investments. And, the tariffs or the surtaxes are really a stopgap approach to give everyone a chance to get things going. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'll turn to Mr. Breton and ask more or less the same question. I think you brought up a lot of those points. I know my wife and I were looking at EVs this summer in lots in British Columbia. There are plenty available there. A lot of them are fairly expensive. But I think British Columbia is ahead of many other provinces because we have a provincial government that is supporting that shift to EVs with EV infrastructure, EV subsidies for purchase. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on that same question and perhaps add what vehicles we are making in Canada now or planning to make in the low-cost EV bracket, or are we ignoring that bracket altogether?
Actually, we are. So that is an issue, and to tell you the truth, there was plans to build, an electric pickup truck in Ontario, and Ford decided to postpone their plans to build an electric pickup truck and go with a gas pickup truck. And one thing that I found really quite stunning, actually, is that now there's a Dodge Charger EV being assembled in Windsor, Ontario. Because there is regulation for EV sales in BC and Quebec, even though Ontario taxpayers are subsidizing the assembly of those cars in Ontario, they won't be able to have access to those cars. Only people in BC and Quebec will have access to those cars. And that shows you the power of regulation. So it is an issue. Car makers like Hyundai, Kia, VW, Ford, GM, VinFast, Tesla, and others are talking about making more affordable electric cars between now and 2027. We just want to make sure that we have access to those cars in Canada, because right now, as I said in my opening statement, car makers are not even making affordable gas cars. I mean, they're not providing them to Canadians anymore. So it is a big issue of affordability, even for gas vehicles. So we want to make sure that we support our workers and our workers start making more affordable gas and electric cars, but specifically electric cars in Canada with the funding that we're giving car makers and suppliers.
So you're suggesting that the 3-year relief period should be used and regulation should be in place to make sure that the cars that are being produced in Canada do reflect that need for lower cost EVs so that we can, the whole reason we're pushing to get EVs built is to bring down our emissions, and we can't do that
Yes.
if people can't afford them.
Exactly. So obviously, right now the price of EVs is getting more and more competitive with the price of gas cars. And if you look at, mid-market, they are very competitive now. But when you're looking at entry-level EVs, there's a gap. I mean, actually, it was easier to buy an entry-level EV 3, 4, 5 years ago than it is now because there was more choice then than there is now. Now, most car manufacturers are offering SUVs, pickup trucks that are more expensive. So if my wife was to scrap her small electric car, she couldn't find anything or hardly anything.
Thank you very much, sir. On to Mr. Baldinelli, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. I just want to follow up with Mr. Warren. And you had mentioned in your discussions the United Steelworkers represent about 225,000 members in the steel, aluminum, and mining sector workers, and you had mentioned the workers are the backbone to Canada's EV supply chain. I just want to follow up on my colleague's line of questioning earlier. You had mentioned you were having discussions with parties about your concerns of the carbon tax ramping up in the coming years and the impact on the Canadian steel industry. So specifically, I mean, what is the union specifically asking for? You had mentioned a carve out in your opening comments. So who are you speaking to? I mean, what have you requested from this government, and what has been their response?
Yeah, well, it's been jointly with the steel producers, and if you listen to the steel producers, they raise a lot of issues. I don't know, they raise issues about just investment, the technology, the further technology they need to have to get where they need to go. I think every steel producer that we're with wants to be a green steel producer, but again, it's the attraction of investment, and if it's uncertain grounds, there's a concern about investment. So I would say that it's best I could say it's a work in progress. I think every party, all three parties, that we did not, or I did not visit the block that day. My apologies. There was the NDP who came later, was the Conservatives and Liberals, and I think they all understood that how important a steel industry is to call yourself a nation, aluminum industry, and I think it's going to take further discussions. Obviously, we're doing a lot of work, the SU, around electric arc furnaces, so that's going to be helpful. But again, I think it's an open dialogue. I don't think you can say the current plan won't work, but we're just now kind of raising some flags to say, hey, sometimes one shoe doesn't fit all, and the steel industry might need a longer ramp up or some other things. But I think it's important to say that we all agree, steel producers and ourselves, that producing green steel
Well, to your point, Mr. Warren, and I think it is important that we have these discussions. You know, we don't operate in isolation, particularly when it comes to other issues and policies impacting the sector. And specifically, I mean, back in November of 2022, Ms. Gingrich appeared here when we were doing a study of the Inflation Reduction Act. And during her testimony, she did say this: we do have some concerns that the IRA's incentive for firms to invest in clean technology, absent any carbon tax, provide a double advantage to U.S. steel producers. She also testified later on, I think the combination of the lack of a price on carbon in the United States and the provisions of the IRA could put the Canadian steel industry at a disadvantage, including our members. So it seems this government, if steel workers aren't being undermined by the Liberals on carbon tax at home, they're being undermined by the Liberals letting artificially cheap Chinese-made EV, steel, and aluminum into Canada. And for many years, they've been undermining Canada on both. So do you agree, and what are your comments on this?
I guess my initial comments would be that there's been two different approaches. In the US, it's been kind of a carrot approach where, with the amount of monies and different pots of monies they're offering up to incentivize a big industry to go green, is that approach. And, the steel producers and other producers would say Canada's using more of a stick approach, fall in line or else the costs go up each year up until 2030. So again, I don't think I'm ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I do believe that it's an issue that we'll continue to discuss to find out what's right, to find out how it works. Because I do want to say this, and it might be out of the wrong spot, but it's so important for every one of us on this call, for our kids and our grandkids. This is a chance to belong to a new economy. Quite frankly, we lost.
Yeah, but Mr. Warren, if I could, what does that stick approach that this federal government has decided to take, what does the risk to those 225,000 members?
The risk.
What does it mean for Stelco, for example, in Hamilton, which was recently purchased by a firm in the United States? What is that stick approach and the cost in terms of carbon? What does that mean to those Canadian workers that live in Hamilton? What does that mean for them?
The risk.
You have 10 seconds, sir, for an answer. Either I don't think you can get an answer in that particular time. I will go on to Mr. Sidhu, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for being here today. Today we're hearing a lot about our Canada carbon pricing mechanisms. Earlier today we also heard about the carbon border adjustments that was mentioned earlier. And for those watching, I'd like to read something for you just so you can understand what carbon border adjustments mean. And I'll read right from the European Union's website. The EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, also known as CBAM, is EU's tool to put a fair price on the carbon emitted during the production of carbon-intensive goods that are entering the EU and to encourage cleaner industrial production in non-EU countries. By confirming that a price has been paid for the embedded carbon emissions generated in the production of certain goods imported into the EU, the CBAM will ensure the carbon price of imports is equivalent to the carbon price of domestic production and that the EU's climate objectives are not undermined. CBAM will ensure the carbon price of imports is equivalent to the carbon price of domestic production, and the EU's, again, climate objectives are not undermined. So if the Conservatives are talking about removing carbon pricing, we know that our exports and industries, the EU composes of a large market, close to 500 million consumers. And Ms. Kwan, the Canadian Labour Congress represents many of these industries that ship to the EU. And so if we remove carbon pricing in Canada and we don't have environmental progressive policies in place, no doubt we'll be hit with import taxes in the EU, which will unfairly target our industries and workers here in Canada. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you for your question. I think that Canada's work on the carbon border adjustment front has been a little slow, and we need to do better on it. My understanding is, and we have a lot to learn from the EU, is that the way that we have been talking about the CBA in Canada is not compatible with how it's not integrated in a way that it would fit in with CBAM. But that doesn't mean that it's not working. That just means that we have to work harder to find ways of actually making the two systems work together. And you're right. If we don't meet some of the basic standards of the EU, or the US for that matter, we will be at a loss. Canada will be penalized, and jobs will be lost, or manufacturing decrease because of that. So one way or another, in order to actually build a sustainable, resilient, green economy, we have to really take a long view and really invest in not just, the EV supply chain, but invest in a lot of other things. For instance, we have to invest in electrification in charging infrastructure. We have to invest in a lot of technology as well. You know, we cannot just say that this particular response to the Chinese EV is the endpoint. It is not. This is, in fact, a very, well, I would say pre-starting point. We need to really, all of us, work really hard to make sure that, you know, we have a very long-term view and long-term investments by government, by manufacturers, by Canadians, by workers, to actually build a future for what, you know, Mr. Warren said, for our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Kwan, for that. And I'd like to turn to Mr. Warren now as well. As we heard from Ms. Kwan today, that is why we stepped up with tariffs on imports from the Chinese EV sector, because we want to make sure we protect industry and workers to make sure that we're all playing on a level playing field. And so, Mr. Warren, I'd like to hear your thoughts on CBAM and how, if we, you know, roll back our supports to the environment and our progressive policies, how that could impact exports to the European Union market and what we're doing here in Canada.
And I think I'd start by saying, and probably echoing what was just said, it can't be just a one-thing approach, whether it be melt and pour, whether it be strong enforcement at the border, whether it be the trade hearings, hearing from workers, whether it be these tariffs that we're talking about today. First thing I would say is our economy, we're not a communist country. It takes our time. It's a democratic country, and we've got to convince consumers. We got to do stuff. We just can't say, "Hey, as of tomorrow, here you go." So I think that is giving us some breathing time, allowing our companies, whether they be in steel manufacturing or anything, to get set up and to get more prepared. Because I will tell you that when we went to the global economy in manufacturing, we lost. Our kids lost. Canada lost, what, 1.5 million jobs in what, a year and a half, 3 years? The U.S. lost millions upon millions of jobs, and we can't have that again. What was the cost of the $50 VCR? I can tell you, wiped out every Zenith manufacturer and Canadian manufacturer. And what we're trying to do with this, whatever element you want to pick, is to build the future, build an economy, take back our economy.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm sorry I have to
children.
cut you off. My apologies.
No
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, please. 2.5 minutes.
En 2 minutes et demie. Bon, il faudrait être très bref.
In 2.5 minutes, I'm going to have to be really, really quick because there is a lot of content here. So, Mr. Breton, first of all, essentially, if I'm not wrong, you say that there are two models, two companies that would be penalized by the tariffs, but the middle class would be completely suffocated by the costs. I think these are models that would not be for the middle class. So just respond, yes or no? Yes. The middle class can certainly access to those vehicles, but in fact, there really isn't any EVs made in China that are offered for $30,000 in Canada. It's $50,000 or more. So we are not penalizing the middle class with those tariffs. Thank you. So in regards to the United States, I think it's clear we can't do this except if we do this on a North America basis. So the United States have put pressure on Canada to put those tariffs. They're worried about Canada. They're saying that we're a sieve in many regards, that we are neglecting many things. So are they really the best ally? And quickly, are there any issues where we could have the Canadian make some points in regard to the United States? It's a very good question. We will have a CUSMA negotiation next year, and I think Canada is going to have to hold its position because right now I believe that we will be losers in this negotiation if we're not paying attention. Thank you. I think we will have an opportunity to talk about it again in this committee, but can you talk to us about clean procurements? Yes. Some people were talking about we are using the stick and not the carrot because we're giving a subsidy of millions of dollars for EVs and battery. So certainly we have the carrot and the stick. I think we are doing a good job in Canada. But one of the things that we've been talking about the last 2 years is to do what we do, clean procurement, which means RFPs that are green and they are not contravening the free trade. So Canada can order components for those vehicles that are green within Canada. And then, so under the free trade, they cannot be penalized, and it would help the businesses and Canadian workers. And at the moment, Canada is not doing this, and this is really a missed opportunity. We have at the University of Sherbrooke, there is a research group that does this. We've talked about it in the House of Commons. We want to see clean procurement be part of Canadian policy.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to turn back to Ms. Kwan from the CLC. And you had a very short period of time to comment or expand on your comments about labor provisions and details on tax credits coming up. And I'm just wondering, I'd just like to give you more time to expand on that and say why it's important and what you hope to see for Canadian workers.
Thank you very much for the question. So in the transition to a green economy, which is, ramping up, with bumps, as that's why we're here today, we need to make sure that the jobs available at the other end and during this transition are good paying, high-skilled jobs. And having said that, I think that there are things that can be put into place, like the labor conditions of prevailing union wages and apprenticeship requirements that would help actually not only maintain the levels of skilled labor and good paying jobs in the sector of, whether it's any part of the EV supply chain. But what it'll do is that it actually builds the workforce that is highly skilled, has good paying unionized jobs, and it actually grows communities. I mean, we've seen this happen before when the auto manufacturing was first established, in Canada, right? Suddenly we have strong communities being built up, being grown because there are those opportunities, and that's why we have to make sure. And why not add value to public investment into these supply chain hubs when we can, and make sure that everyone has a piece of that prosperity down the line.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly turn to Mr. Breton again. And tariffs will create, they'll benefit the manufacturers that are being protected by them, but they'll also create revenue. Do you have any ideas of what that revenue should be put toward in terms of incentivizing this shift to more EV sales?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean by revenue. There won't be any revenue for because those tariff means that the car manufacturers are right now making or importing cars from China. They will stop importing them from China. They will either import them from the US or from Europe, but it's just going to stop the importation of electric cars made in China right now.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, on to Mr. General for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's good to be back. Good to see everybody again, and thank you to the witnesses for taking the time to be here today. Just wanting to quickly, my colleague across the table here, Mr. Sidhu, his comments were that he mentioned Conservatives want to remove the carbon tax. You bet we do want to remove the carbon tax. Glad that Mr. Sidhu's finally come on board and hearing the message to that. But I would stress to him that it's not just Conservatives that want to remove the carbon tax. There's premiers across the country now, even in Mr. Canning's home province of BC. He's moving away from the carbon tax. This is what Canadians are asking for. At the end of the day, the carbon tax is driving up the cost of groceries, home heating, and getting goods to market. So just want to make sure that Mr. Sidhu knows that it's not just us that's asking for this. We're reflecting the thoughts of Canadians from across the country. Might just share a little bit of my time with my new colleague to the committee, Mr. Williams, at the end, but want to quickly ask Mr. Herman, a brief question. You mentioned as part of your opening comments about the softwood lumber always kind of being an issue. The fact is it wasn't as big of an issue today as it was under the Stephen Harper Conservative government. And it wasn't until the agreement ended in October of 2015 that all that this government has been able to do is secure a moratorium for the softwood lumber agreement. So I would like to ask you, Mr. Herman, if you see this as a bigger issue in terms of the relationship between the current government and the government down in the United States, coupling this with the digital sales tax as well that's come into force. Is this are these issues that will cause friction to that relationship?
Well, frankly, I don't think the softwood lumber issue is something that would destabilize our relationship with the United States. I had said earlier that it is an irritant, it is a problem, and it can only be resolved, in my view, through a separate agreement between Canada and the United States to deal with these issues. But I don't see softwood lumber as a destabilizing element in our relationship. It is one of a series of difficulties we have with our major trading partner. So I would hope that both sides could come to some agreement on settling this. But at the end of the day, it's about the U.S. industry wanting to protect its market share. And as long as they have the money to pay lawyers, will destabilize our good relationship, generally speaking, with the Americans.
Remaining, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the committee. Ms. Kwan, we talk about union members and good workers in Canada. We want to protect those jobs. We're talking about the mining sector. So right now, this committee is debating tariffs on China. This government right now has not chosen to put tariffs on critical minerals from China. But 70% of cobalt and lithium is mined and refined and bought from Canada here. So it's not, those aren't union jobs in Canada, those are in China. 90% of rare minerals that provide batteries and magnets for batteries, they're mined in China and brought here. What can you tell me about the labor standards here in Canada versus China, and why those jobs should be protected, those mining jobs here in Canada, those unionized mining jobs?
Thank you for your question. I'm not really that clear about what you're asking about, but definitely we have higher labor standards. In fact, because we have higher labor standards, we are attractive to the EU, we are attractive to the US, and I think that that's very valuable to our trading relationships with the US and the EU. In terms of, if you want to talk about labor standards, much of I believe, the extraction as well as the production of critical minerals for EV batteries are actually made in Xinjiang, which you know very well is made, is where a lot of forced labor is used. So, if I have, absolutely no desire for our standards to get to those standards in terms of our future in the green economy.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Arya for the completion of the second round.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, sometimes I have policy disagreements with our colleague, Mr. Cannings, but I should state that the sentiments Mr. Cannings expressed during the first round of questioning, I agree with it. On the bigger picture, Madam Chair, the world order is changing, which started before COVID. Now it has since then accelerated. Globalization, as we know, is dead. So is almost the free trade. The free trade which benefited both developing countries and developed countries is on its way out. Protectionism is in. We are focusing on onshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, and obviously we all want to protect our domestic industries. Where it will lead to, what impacts it will have, will be known after quite some time. But immediate impact would be whatever the policies to protect our industries we take will also have immediate effect on our other sectors within Canada, which are export dependent. Canadian agriculture sector have made Canadian agri-foods and agriculture produce exports. They have made Canada the 5th largest in the world. And it is that sector, I think, is going to get first impacted by the decision that we have made. Probably the canola growers will be the first group of farmers who are going to get affected. However, this is a reality. United States is our biggest trading partner. Our economic prosperity is linked and dependent on our trade with the United States. And once the United States took the decision to impose tariffs on EVs from China, it was inevitable that we follow suit. As a Global Mail editorial recently wrote, matching American tariffs would be the right decision, even though that such tariffs are usually bad. As I said, this is a new paradigm. We don't know where it leads to. And it does not affect only Canada, it affects all the countries in the world, especially the developed countries in the world who were the champions of the free trade. Mr. Lawrence Herman, I got a question for you. I did read your article in Global Mail on this issue. And I also listened to your comments today. I think I don't know if you are 100% confident that the route we took using Section 53 of the Customs Tariff Act to do this is the right one. Obviously, taking this route means that we are losing the WTO cover, which we could have used to reaffirm our commitment to multilateral rules-based order. In that article, you do propose that we can provide two arguments. I think one of that arguments would have necessitated what you just proposed today, that we amend the Section 53 of the Custom Tariff Act by including reference to national security. Obviously, the decision that we have taken may not go to the court to face the challenges. So the intricacies of what route we took, why we didn't go through the WTO route or the route we took may not get challenged. But I just want to ask you again, are you confident that the route we have taken using Section 53 is the right one?
I am confident that it is the right route that we have taken in this case. Look, the world multilateral trading order is under tremendous stress. I think we've reached a point where it doesn't answer all of the challenges that countries face. And in this case, Canada took steps, and I think those steps are, in my view, consistent with the right of governments, members of the WTO, to take exceptional measures to protect national security. We don't need to get into all the intricate legal arguments, but I think we did the right thing. And we have to recognize that some of the rules of the multilateral order, which were drafted many, many decades ago, need to be adjusted and need to take into account the contemporary trading environment. And so we did the right thing. I think that, as I said before, we're part of a trade agreement with the United States and Mexico. I think we need to consolidate our operations as best we can and coordinate with our major trading partners. So from a legal and policy point of view, my conclusion is that the Section 53 tariffs were the right move in this case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herman. All right, that completes the 2 rounds. We have booked for some committee business. This is our first meeting of the new section. I will suspend so that we can go into camera.
Thank you.